Dr Jay Bhattacharya, thank you so much for speaking to us here at the Aussie Wire. We're in the atrium, everyone's having a break, having a coffee. There's a lot of noise here, but I'm really grateful you've given us a moment of your time. Most people would be familiar with you already, familiar with your work. I'm a little bit of a fan, I'll be honest about that. I think you've shown incredible courage and you've done incredible work.
You're very kind.
Why are you here at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship? What's the interest in what they're doing?
I mean, I think it's, first of all, it's an incredible group of people that many of whom I admire. So when I had the chance to come, I jumped at it. It seems like, but I also admire the deep commitment to basic liberal values, which, I mean, to my eye, during the pandemic, so many governments just forgot. And we essentially went through an authoritarian time with ostensibly liberal governments saying it's okay. And I think we absolutely need to remember why we had those values so that we can bring them back. I think society can't function the way we did during the pandemic, and to have the powers that many of those governments took on themselves for the lockdowns and so on. I think we need a renewal.
Well, a renewal is one way to put it. The way that ARC put it is a better story. What's this better story? What is this renewal? What does that look like?
I mean, to me, it's the old story.
Okay.
It's not different. I mean, I think basic things like a commitment to free speech,
okay.
a commitment to honest scientific discourse, a commitment to basic human rights. These are not, I thought, previous to the pandemic, controversial. And my eyes were opened, actually. I know there were many people that were arguing that we had a deterioration of those values before the pandemic.
Yeah.
To me, the pandemic made it very, very clear that they were absolutely right, that our societies are fragile in ways that I didn't understand before. And so we need a recommitment to those old values. They worked, and they will continue to work into the future if we just recommit to them.
So what went wrong then that we lost that? If the new story, the better story, is the old story, how did we lose that story in the first place?
I mean, I think I'll focus on the pandemic rather than the broader things. So I think during the pandemic, what we realized is that we think of ourselves as civilized, but we are actually, in many ways, just the old tribal people that we once were. We were scared of each other, that we might get germs from each other. Those kinds of stories, that story where we are each biohazards to each other, we are in competition with each other, we should be scared of each other. That story is a terrible story that leads to dissolution of societies, that leads to deep harm to vulnerable people. But we adopted that during the pandemic because of fear. And a lot of the institutions that I thought would serve as a counter to that fear, unfortunately, like public health, like medicine, it reinforced it. It said, we have to do this because that's the wise, kind thing to do. And I think that's what needs renewal. I think a fundamental realization that our civilization, where we connect with each other, we don't treat each other as biohazard, we treat each other as human beings that we learn from each other, that we love each other. That kind of civilization requires this basic liberal commitment.
Yeah.
And that's what we forgot during the pandemic.
So during the pandemic, let's talk about that for a moment. You raised your voice as a doctor with, let's just say, a counter-narrative position. And of course, because the West has such a commitment to free speech and such a commitment to scientific inquiry and medical freedom, everyone listened to you and took your advice seriously and took that into account, didn't they? Is that how that worked?
I mean, Topher, as you know, there was a furious reaction to the arguments I was making during the pandemic. But it wasn't just in science, it's normal to have furious fights. That's debate, right? The problem during the pandemic was that it wasn't a debate. It was essentially a move by the central authorities of government, of medicine, to suppress debate, to pretend like there was nothing to debate at all, and that anyone that wanted to raise basic scientific points, most of which turned out to be correct. You know, there's immunity after COVID recovery. The vaccine doesn't stop you from getting COVID. The mortality risk is highest for the oldest people, and much less for the younger people. All these were like absolutely true facts, yet you weren't allowed to say them.
Yeah.
realized during the pandemic was not a debate. It was a suppression of the debate.
Yeah.
And I was called a fringe epidemiologist by the head of the National Institute of Health. It's an abuse of power.
Yeah.
And I think that shocked me. And I think we have to understand why that happened so we can get reform. And we really need to discuss that. And then if you just pretend like it never happened and move on, it'll happen again.
Yeah. So you've had an incredible ride over the last couple of years. Let's just put it that way. And there are many places where you've been rejected, you've been maligned, you've been libeled and slandered, quite frankly. If I were to Google you, I'd find out that you're a conspiracy theorist and a nut job and all kinds of different things. And yet clearly you're still welcome here. What's different about this group here that makes someone like yourself not only welcome but actually celebrated when you are being rejected in so many other places?
I mean, I think this conference is interesting because it's not as if I agree with everybody here.
Sure.
I think the key value that this conference has is a fundamental commitment to basic liberal society, basic liberal principles.
Yeah.
And it's not a primarily a political stance, unless you think of that as a deep political. I think the reason why I'm welcome here is because they share this idea that liberal society needs a diverse set of voices.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm actually fringe, but that's another.
No, I don't think you are either. I don't think you are either. And I've learned that it's actually, sometimes you can tell when someone insults somebody, it's actually a compliment. If they're the wrong kind of person and they insult you, say, I don't like you, I think you're an idiot. Well, actually, sometimes that's a compliment, and I feel like that's been the case with so many people criticizing you. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, thank you so much for all the work that you've done over the last few years, for the courage that you've shown, and for these couple of minutes speaking to us here at the Aussie Wire. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure.